That Thursday night destroyed my entire world. I can still feel my hands trembling when I think about the moment I realized Rebecca had been systematically sabotaging my career while I was helping her succeed. 9 years. 9 years of covering for her, staying late when she needed support, celebrating her victories like they were my own. And she used every single act of kindness as ammunition to destroy me. When I offered to stay late that night to help with those reports, I thought I was being the friend she'd always counted on. I had no idea I was signing my own professional death warrant. Rebecca took my loyalty, my trust, everything I'd given her over nearly a decade, and she weaponized it all against me. She told Patterson I was disruptive, incompetent, that I slowed her down when the truth was I'd been carrying her for years. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal, cutting so deep I still can't sleep some nights, thinking about how blind I was. She never had the guts to face me when it all came crashing down. Couldn't even look me in the eye in that parking lot, when I was loading my stuff into my car, like some kind of criminal. But what happened next? What I discovered about how long she'd been planning this. How she turned my entire team against me. ... That's when I understood I'd been living in a complete lie. When I agreed to stay an extra shift that Thursday evening, my only goal was to help. I saw that Rebecca was drowning in paperwork, and like I'd done countless times over the past 9 years at Henderson and Associates, I offered my support. It wasn't my obligation, sure, but that's just who I was. The office was practically empty, the fluorescent lights humming their usual tune, and there she sat at her desk looking overwhelmed. I remember thinking how loyalty and trust were the foundation of our professional relationship, how helping each other through rough patches was what made us a team. Little did I know that my simple gesture of staying late would plant the seeds of my own professional destruction. The confidence I had in our friendship was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. The break I sacrificed without thinking twice became the first domino in a chain of events that would change everything. The clock hit 6:30, right when I was supposed to grab dinner and decompress from another long day. I glanced over at Rebecca, surrounded by client files and looking frazzled, and the words just came out naturally. "Want me to stick around a bit longer?" She barely looked up, just nodded her head like it was expected. So I stayed, skipping my meal, ignoring the ache in my feet from standing all day. The disappointment of missing my evening routine seemed insignificant compared to helping a colleague in need. I told myself that's what good teammates do. They sacrifice their own comfort for the greater good. But that night, as I worked beside her in the quiet office, something felt different about the way she accepted my help. The way she looked at me when I offered to stay wasn't gratitude, it was expectation. There was no surprise in her eyes, no real appreciation, just this cold acceptance like I was part of the office furniture. It hit me then, though I didn't want to admit it, that maybe I'd become too convenient, too predictable in my willingness to help. The professional environment we built together seemed suddenly one-sided, and I felt this nagging frustration that I couldn't quite name. Her reaction made me question whether all those late nights and extra hours had been seen as teamwork or just ... expected labor. The learning experience was starting, though I didn't realize it yet. What I was about to discover would challenge everything I thought I knew about workplace relationships and the price of being too giving. The betrayal that was coming would teach me lessons about boundaries I never thought I'd need to learn. What I gave up for myself that night would haunt me later when I understood the true cost of my generosity. I was exhausted, bone-deep tired from covering 2 shifts earlier that week when another colleague called in sick. I had a doctor's appointment scheduled for 7, one I'd been trying to get for weeks, and I ended up having to reschedule it. My feet were killing me, my lower back ached, but I pushed through because I thought she needed me. The supermarket was closed by the time I finally left, so I went home to an empty fridge and a cold dinner. I remember sitting in my small apartment, eating leftover pizza, thinking, I'll take care of myself tomorrow. Tonight she needed me more. The confidence I had in my decision felt solid then, but it was built on the shaky foundation of assuming she valued my sacrifice the way I valued helping her. The overtime I put in that evening wasn't just about work. It was about preserving what I thought was a meaningful professional relationship. We'd been through so much together at the company, weathered difficult clients, celebrated small victories, shared countless coffee breaks where we talk about our dreams and frustrations. The trust between us felt unshakable, or so I believed. I genuinely thought that by staying late, I was investing in our partnership, showing the kind of loyalty that makes workplaces feel like family. The environment felt collaborative, supportive, the way I'd always imagined professional relationships should be. But as I filed those last documents and organized her desk before leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The disappointment was subtle, just a whisper in the back of my mind, but it was there. Looking back now, I realized that night was when I started learning the hardest lesson of my career, about the difference between being valued and being used. The frustration I felt walking to my car wasn't just about being tired or hungry. It was about recognition, about feeling seen for the sacrifice I'd made. Rebecca had barely acknowledged my extra hours, hadn't even said thank you properly. She'd just packed up her things and left while I was still organizing the files she'd asked me to handle. The professional courtesy I expected, the simple human decency of acknowledging someone's help, was absent. I drove home that night with a knot in my stomach, telling myself I was being dramatic, that she was just stressed and would appreciate it tomorrow. The confidence I had in her character was about to be shattered, but I clung to it like a lifeline, desperate to believe in the friendship I thought we had. The seeds of what would become my professional downfall were planted that very evening, though I was too trusting to see it coming. My willingness to help, my loyalty to someone I considered a friend, my naive belief that good intentions would be rewarded with respect and gratitude were all about to be turned against me. The betrayal was being written in that quiet office as I worked late into the night, filing her papers and answering her emails, thinking I was building trust when I was actually painting a target on my back. The learning that was coming would be brutal but necessary, teaching me about the delicate balance between being helpful and being taken advantage of. Little did I know that my act of kindness would be twisted into evidence of my inadequacy, that my extra effort would somehow become proof that I was overstepping boundaries I didn't even know existed. The frustration and disappointment I felt walking out that night were just previews of the emotional devastation that was waiting for me around the corner. 2 days later, our supervisor, Mr. Patterson, called me into his cramped office to align expectations, as he put it. I walked in confused, still riding the wave of confidence from helping Rebecca through that busy evening, expecting maybe some recognition for going above and beyond. The fluorescent light above his desk flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the growing unease in my stomach. His face was stern, professional, but there was something cold about his demeanor that I'd never experienced before. Then he opened his mouth, and the words that came out shattered my world. "It's become clear that your presence didn't help with that closing the other night. Rebecca mentioned that you disrupted the workflow." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs and leaving me speechless in that uncomfortable chair. The trust I'd built with Rebecca, the loyalty I'd shown, was being weaponized against me in ways I never saw coming. "Disrupted the workflow" became the phrase that haunted my sleepless nights and destroyed my confidence for months. Those 3 words echoed in my head like a broken record, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. I sat there in Patterson's office, my hands trembling slightly, trying to process how my sacrifice had been twisted into sabotage. The professional environment I thought I understood had rules I apparently didn't know, invisible boundaries I'd crossed without realizing it. The disappointment wasn't just about being misunderstood. It was about discovering that someone I trusted had painted me as incompetent, as a hindrance rather than a help. I wanted to defend myself, to explain what really happened, but the words stuck in my throat like concrete. The learning experience was brutal and immediate. Sometimes the people you help the most are the ones who hurt you the worst. The frustration of being unable to articulate my innocence while sitting across from Patterson's judgmental stare was overwhelming. The worst part was overhearing her conversation with Patterson through that poorly closed door the day before our meeting. I'd been walking past his office, heading to the break room for coffee, When I heard Rebecca's voice drifting through the gap, my footsteps slowed involuntarily as I caught fragments of what she was saying. I prefer working alone. She gets confused with the spreadsheets ... Honestly, she just slows me down. Each word was like a dagger to my back, delivered in her calm, measured tone that I'd always found so reassuring. The betrayal wasn't just in what she said, but in how easily she said it, like talking about the weather. I stood frozen in that hallway, my coffee mug shaking in my hands, as she systematically dismantled 9 years of what I thought was mutual respect and professional partnership. The trust I'd invested in her was being liquidated right there behind that door, sold off to save her own reputation. The confidence I'd had in our friendship evaporated instantly, replaced by a sick realization that I'd been played. Her behavior toward me after that meeting was perhaps even more devastating than the meeting itself. She walked past my desk the next morning like I was invisible. No good morning, no acknowledgement of my existence, let alone any gratitude for the extra hours I put in. The professional environment that had once felt collaborative and warm suddenly became arctic, with Rebecca as the source of the cold front. When I tried to catch her eye, she'd look right through me, or suddenly become very interested in whatever was on her computer screen. The disappointment of losing what I thought was a friendship was compounded by the humiliation of being treated like a pariah. I kept thinking about all those coffee breaks we'd shared, all the times we'd covered for each other, all the late-night conversations about our dreams and struggles. The loyalty I'd shown her meant nothing, apparently, when weighed against her own self-preservation. The learning was harsh but clear. Some people will throw you under the bus, without hesitation if it means protecting themselves. The ripple effects of her version of events spread through our small office like wildfire, poisoning every professional relationship I'd built over nearly a decade. Conversations would stop when I entered a room, replaced by awkward silences that spoke volumes about what had been discussed in my absence. Colleagues who used to greet me warmly now offered tight, uncomfortable smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The trust I'd built with my co-workers was being systematically destroyed by whatever narrative Rebecca had crafted about that night. I could feel the shift in the professional environment, the way people started questioning my competence, my judgment, my very presence in the office. The frustration of being unable to defend myself against accusations I didn't even fully understand was maddening. Rebecca had successfully rewritten history, casting herself as the victim of my supposed incompetence rather than the beneficiary of my generosity. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional suicide disguised as colleague feedback. What hurt most was realizing how calculated her actions were, how she'd used my willingness to help as evidence of my overreach. In her version of events, my staying late wasn't dedication or teamwork. It was me inserting myself where I didn't belong, disrupting established processes, creating more work instead of reducing it. The confidence I'd had in my own abilities began to crumble under the weight of her accusations. Had I really been helpful all those years, or had I been fooling myself? The learning process was painful, forcing me to question every interaction, every offer of assistance, every moment when I thought I was being a good colleague. Rebecca had weaponized my kindness, turning my greatest strength into my apparent weakness. The disappointment ran deeper than losing a friend. It was about losing faith in my own judgment, my own worth, my own understanding of what it meant to be professional. The trust I'd placed in her had been not just broken but perverted, used to construct a narrative that portrayed me as the problem rather than the solution. As I sat in Patterson's office that day, listening to him recite Rebecca's version of events, I finally understood the true nature of workplace politics and the price of being too giving. The professional environment I'd navigated successfully for years had hidden currents I'd never noticed, power dynamics I'd been too naive to recognize. Rebecca hadn't just betrayed our friendship, she'd orchestrated my professional downfall with surgical precision, using my own loyalty as the weapon. The frustration of being outmaneuvered by someone I trusted completely was almost unbearable. But perhaps most devastating was the realization that this wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate choice to sacrifice me for her own benefit. The learning that was forced upon me in that moment would change how I approached every professional relationship going forward. The betrayal was complete, the trust was gone, and the confidence I'd once had in reading people and situations was shattered beyond repair. The shift in my colleagues' behavior was so gradual at first that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Smiles that used to be warm and genuine became shorter, more forced, like they were checking off a politeness requirement rather than expressing actual friendliness. Conversations that had flowed naturally for years now seemed to hit invisible walls whenever I approached, voices dropping to whispers or topics changing abruptly. The professional environment that had once felt like a second family suddenly became hostile territory where I was the unwelcome outsider. Trust, which I'd always taken for granted in my relationships with coworkers, evaporated like morning dew under the scorching sun of Rebecca's narrative. The loyalty I'd shown to the team over nearly a decade meant nothing when weighed against fresh gossip and carefully planted doubts. Lunch invitations that had been routine for years simply stopped coming, leaving me to eat alone in the break room while my former friends gathered at tables just out of earshot. The confidence I'd once had in my place within the office hierarchy crumbled as I realized how easily I could be erased from the social fabric of the workplace. The day they held that quick alignment meeting without me was when the full scope of my professional isolation became undeniably clear. I watched from my desk as one by one, my colleagues filed into the conference room, notebooks in hand, ready for what was obviously a planned discussion. The disappointment hit me like a physical blow, as I realized I was the only one left sitting in the main office area, listening to the muffled sounds of their meeting through the thin walls. When Sarah walked past my desk, I asked with forced casualness, "Should I be in there too?" Her response was a masterclass in corporate deflection. "Oh, it's just a quick thing. Nothing major, really." The betrayal wasn't just coming from Rebecca anymore. It was spreading through the entire team like a virus, infecting relationships I thought were solid. The learning experience was brutal but immediate. Once you're marked as problematic, every exclusion gets justified as nothing personal. The trust I'd built with these people over years of shared projects and mutual support was dissolving faster than sugar in rain. The whispered comments I pretended not to hear became the soundtrack to my daily humiliation in that sterile office environment. Standing in line at the coffee machine, I caught fragments of conversations that stopped abruptly when people noticed me. "She just inserts herself everywhere, ... and always trying to be the hero, you know?" Each comment was like a small knife wound, not fatal individually but collectively bleeding me dry of confidence and self-worth. The frustration of being unable to defend myself against accusations I couldn't fully identify was maddening. I found myself second-guessing every interaction, every email, every offer of help, wondering if my colleagues saw genuine assistance or unwanted interference. The professional relationships I'd cultivated so carefully were being rewritten in real time, with me cast as the antagonist in a story I didn't even know was being told. The loyalty I'd shown was being reframed as neediness, my work ethic as desperation, my collaboration as manipulation. The disappointment wasn't just about losing friendships. It was about discovering that these relationships had apparently been more fragile than I'd ever imagined. The email incident became the perfect symbol of how thoroughly I was being erased from the team's collective memory and future plans. For 3 years, I'd co-authored the monthly productivity reports with Rebecca, my name appearing alongside hers on every distribution list, every acknowledgement from upper management. Then one Tuesday morning, the latest report landed in my inbox with only her name in the signature line, as if I'd never contributed a single word, graph, or analysis. The betrayal was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it took my breath away. When I approached Rebecca about it, her response was delivered with the kind of practiced indifference that suggested this had been planned. Management thought it would be cleaner to have single authorship going forward. The trust I'd placed in our professional partnership was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, with each erasure more brazen than the last. The learning was harsh but immediate. In office politics, you can go from essential to invisible overnight. The confidence I'd had in my contributions to the team was being retroactively questioned. My value reduced to nothing with the stroke of a delete key. What hurt most was realizing that people I'd considered friends were actively participating in my professional assassination rather than questioning the narrative being built around me. Jessica, who I'd covered for during her maternity leave, now avoided eye contact in the hallways. David, whose presentations I'd helped polish for years, suddenly seemed too busy to chat during coffee breaks. The professional environment that had once felt supportive and collaborative became a minefield where every step could trigger an explosion of awkwardness or hostility. The disappointment of discovering that my colleagues' loyalty was so easily transferred from me to Rebecca was devastating. I'd helped train half these people, had been there for them during personal crises, had celebrated their promotions and achievements. None of that history seemed to matter when weighed against the fresh poison Rebecca had injected into the office atmosphere. The frustration of being abandoned by people who knew my character, who had experienced my reliability firsthand, was almost unbearable. The betrayal had metastasized beyond Rebecca to encompass the entire team, turning my workplace into an emotional war zone where I was fighting alone. The isolation became so complete that I started eating lunch in my car, just to avoid the awkwardness of sitting alone in the break room while my former friends gathered around their exclusive table. The trust I'd once had in the basic decency of my coworkers was shattered beyond repair. These were people who had shared personal stories with me, who had asked for my advice on everything from career decisions to relationship problems. Now they looked at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was someone they actively disliked. The professional environment had become toxic, with me as the unwitting target of a character assassination campaign that I was powerless to stop. The confidence I'd once had in my ability to read people and situations was completely destroyed. Had I misunderstood every relationship, every interaction, every moment of what I thought was genuine connection? The learning was painful but necessary. Workplace friendships are often more fragile than we want to believe, and they can be destroyed by someone with the right influence and the wrong intentions. The loyalty I'd given so freely had been weaponized against me, turned into evidence of my supposed inadequacy and overreach. As the weeks passed and my isolation deepened, I realized that Rebecca had accomplished something truly masterful in her destruction of my professional life. She hadn't just turned people against me, she'd made them complicit in my ostracism, giving them reasons to feel justified in their treatment of me. The disappointment was profound, not just in losing my place in the team, but in discovering how easily good people could be manipulated into cruelty when given the right narrative. The betrayal was complete and systematic, touching every relationship I'd built, every connection I'd valued, every source of professional satisfaction I'd cultivated over nearly a decade. The trust I'd placed in human decency was shattered, replaced by a hard-earned understanding of how quickly someone can go from valued team member to persona non grata. The frustration of being unable to fight back against whisper campaigns and subtle exclusions was maddening, but it was also educational in the cruelest possible way. The learning that emerged from this experience would change how I approached every future professional relationship, teaching me that loyalty is often a one-way street, and that trust, once broken, leaves scars that never fully heal. The formal meeting with Patterson felt like a tribunal from the moment I walked into his office, the air thick with predetermined conclusions and corporate formality. His desk was arranged with papers I'd never seen before, documents that would later reveal themselves to be my professional death warrant, written in the sanitized language of human resources. The confidence I'd tried to maintain throughout this ordeal crumbled as I realized this wasn't a conversation or even an opportunity to defend myself. It was a sentencing hearing where the verdict had already been reached. The professional environment that had once felt familiar and navigable now seemed foreign and hostile, with rules I'd apparently violated without knowing they existed. Rebecca was notably absent from this execution, probably by design, sparing her the discomfort of watching her lies destroy someone who had trusted her completely. The betrayal was about to reach its crescendo, and I was powerless to stop it. The learning that would come from this meeting would be the most brutal lesson of my career, about how easily someone's reputation can be assassinated with carefully crafted half-truths and strategic absences. When Patterson delivered the line that would haunt me for months afterward, his tone was so casually cruel that it took me several seconds to fully process what he'd said. "Maybe it's time you considered other possibilities, either within the company or elsewhere," he said with a smile that made my skin crawl, as if he were doing me a favor by suggesting I might want to find another job. The disappointment wasn't just in hearing those words. It was in recognizing that this man, who I'd worked under for 5 years, was delivering them with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. The trust I'd placed in the basic fairness of the corporate system evaporated in that moment, replaced by the stark realization that I was completely alone in this fight. The frustration of being railroaded out of a job I'd dedicated nearly a decade of my life to was overwhelming. But what made it worse was the knowledge that Rebecca had orchestrated this entire scenario from the shadows. The professional environment I believed in, with its promises of merit-based advancement and fair treatment, revealed itself to be nothing more than a popularity contest where the most manipulative person wins. The loyalty I'd shown to the company, the countless hours of overtime, the sacrifices I'd made for the team's success, meant nothing when weighed against one person's desire to eliminate perceived competition. The performance review document Patterson slid across his desk was a masterpiece of character, assassination disguised as professional feedback. According to this report, I was resistant to change, requiring constant supervision, and lacking in collaborative skills. Descriptions so far from reality that I almost laughed out loud. The betrayal wasn't just in the lies themselves, but in how they'd been crafted to sound like legitimate concerns, rather than the fabricated nonsense they actually were. None of these supposed issues had ever been mentioned to me in previous reviews, in casual conversations, or in any of the numerous one-on-one meetings I'd had with Patterson over the years. The confidence I'd had in my own abilities was being systematically destroyed by fictional narratives presented as documented fact. The learning experience was brutal. In corporate America, perception is often more powerful than reality. And if someone with influence decides you're a problem, you become one regardless of your actual performance. The trust I'd placed in the feedback process, in the idea that honest communication would protect good employees, was shattered beyond repair. The disappointment of discovering that my professional reputation could be rewritten so easily was devastating. But what hurt most was knowing that Rebecca had probably contributed to every damning sentence in that report. What made the meeting even more surreal was Patterson's insistence that this feedback represented a pattern of behavior that had been documented over time. Despite my consistently positive reviews up until this point, the frustration of being unable to defend myself against accusations that were presented as established facts was maddening. Every attempt I made to provide context or examples of my actual performance was dismissed with bureaucratic efficiency, as if my version of events was irrelevant to the predetermined narrative. The professional environment that had once felt collaborative and fair revealed itself to be a kangaroo court where the defendant was never actually meant to have a voice. The betrayal was complete. Not only had Rebecca successfully poisoned my reputation, but she'd done it in a way that made me look delusional if I tried to fight back. The loyalty I'd shown to the company was being repaid with a character assassination, so thorough that it called into question everything I thought I knew about my own competence. The learning that emerged from this meeting was harsh but necessary. Sometimes the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended to protect the people who know how to manipulate it. Throughout this entire ordeal, Rebecca's strategic absence spoke louder than any words could have. She'd successfully destroyed my career without having to look me in the eye or take responsibility for her lies. The cowardice of her approach was almost as infuriating as the lies themselves. The trust I'd placed in her character, in the idea that she possessed basic human decency, was revealed to be completely misplaced. She'd orchestrated my downfall with the precision of a chess master, moving pieces behind the scenes while maintaining plausible deniability about her role in my destruction. The professional environment we'd shared for years had apparently meant nothing to her. I was just collateral damage in whatever game she was playing. The disappointment of being betrayed by someone I'd considered a friend was compounded by the realization that she lacked even the courage to face me during my execution. The confidence I'd once had in my ability to judge people's character was shattered, replaced by a cynical understanding of how easily someone can wear a mask of friendship while plotting your destruction. The learning was painful but necessary. Some people are capable of betrayals, so complete and calculating that they reveal themselves to be fundamentally different from who you thought they were. As I walked out of Patterson's office that day, I understood with crystalline clarity that my time at Henderson & Associates was over, regardless of what official decision was eventually reached. The betrayal had been so complete, the character assassination so thorough, that there was no path back to the professional relationships and reputation I'd spent years building. The frustration of being outmaneuvered so completely by someone I'd trusted was overwhelming, but it was mixed with a strange sense of relief at finally understanding the true nature of the situation. The trust I'd placed in corporate fairness, in the idea that good work would be rewarded and loyalty would be respected, was gone forever. The disappointment wasn't just about losing my job. It was about losing my faith in the fundamental decency of the workplace I'd dedicated so much of my life to. The professional environment that had once felt like home now felt like enemy territory, with Rebecca's invisible hand guiding every conversation and decision. The learning that came from this experience would change how I approached every future job, every workplace relationship, every offer of help or collaboration. The loyalty I'd given so freely would never again be offered without careful consideration of the potential cost. The most devastating realization was that Rebecca had probably been planning this betrayal for longer than I could have imagined, possibly seeing me as a threat to her own advancement long before I had any idea we were in competition. The confidence I'd had in our friendship, in the mutual respect and professional partnership we'd built, was revealed to be a complete illusion. She'd used my trust against me, weaponizing my willingness to help and my naive belief in the power of hard work and loyalty. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal, cutting to the core of my understanding of human nature and workplace relationships. The frustration of being so thoroughly played by someone I'd considered a friend was almost unbearable, but it was also educational in the most painful way possible. The learning that emerged from this meeting would stay with me forever. In the modern workplace, your greatest enemy might be wearing the mask of your closest ally, and the very qualities that make you a good person, trust, loyalty, generosity, can be turned into weapons against you by someone skilled in the art of corporate manipulation. My last day at Henderson & Associates was as unceremonious as a Tuesday morning garbage pickup, with about as much fanfare and recognition. There were no farewell parties, no flowers on my desk, no heartfelt cards wishing me well in future endeavors. The professional environment that had been my second home for nearly a decade treated my departure like the removal of outdated office equipment, necessary, unremarkable, and quickly forgotten. The disappointment of leaving without any acknowledgement of my years of service was crushing, but it was also oddly fitting given how thoroughly Rebecca had erased my contributions from the collective memory of the office. The trust I'd placed in the basic human decency of my colleagues was proven to be misplaced as I packed my personal items into a cardboard box while they went about their daily routines as if nothing was happening. The betrayal had been so complete that even my exit was treated as insignificant, a minor administrative task rather than the end of someone's career. The learning that came from this final indignity was simple but brutal. Once you've been marked for elimination, you become invisible long before you actually leave. The cardboard box that held my personal belongings felt heavier than it should have, weighted not just with desk photos and coffee mugs, but with the emotional residue of years of dedication and sacrifice. Each item I placed inside represented a memory, a moment when I'd believed I was building something meaningful with these people. The small potted plant I'd kept alive for 3 years, the motivational calendar I'd used to track project deadlines, the coffee mug with the company logo that I'd received for my 5-year anniversary. All of it seemed pathetic now, evidence of how invested I'd been in a place that had ultimately discarded me without a second thought. The confidence I'd once had in my value to the organization was reduced to this pitiful collection of personal effects that fit easily into a box small enough to carry with one hand. The frustration of being reduced to so little after giving so much was almost overwhelming. The professional relationships I'd thought were genuine were revealed to be nothing more than convenient arrangements that could be severed without effort or regret. The loyalty I'd shown for years was repaid with indifference so complete that it felt like a deliberate insult. The encounter in the parking lot became the perfect symbol of how thoroughly Rebecca had succeeded in dehumanizing me in her own mind. I was loading my pathetic box into my car when I saw her walking toward her vehicle, and for a moment, I thought maybe she'd finally find the courage to face me, to offer some explanation, or even a hollow apology. Instead, she turned her head away like I was a homeless person asking for change, deliberately avoiding eye contact while fumbling with her keys. The betrayal wasn't just in what she'd done to destroy my career. It was in her refusal to acknowledge my humanity even in this final moment. The trust I'd placed in her basic decency was shattered by that simple act of cowardice, that inability to look at the person she'd systematically destroyed. The disappointment was profound, not because I expected an apology, but because I'd apparently meant so little to her that she couldn't even manage basic human acknowledgement. The learning was harsh but clear. Some people can commit the most devastating betrayals and then act as if you never existed, protecting themselves from guilt by erasing you from their reality. The confidence I'd once had in my ability to matter to other people was completely destroyed by that moment of deliberate blindness. What hurt most about that final day was the realization that my departure had been so carefully orchestrated that it felt anticlimactic rather than tragic. The professional environment had been so thoroughly poisoned against me that my leaving was probably a relief to everyone involved, including people who had once called me a friend. The desk where I'd sat for years was cleared and cleaned before I'd even left the building, ready for the next person to occupy as if I'd never been there at all. The projects I'd worked on were seamlessly transferred to other team members without acknowledgement of my contributions. The relationships I thought were meaningful were severed so cleanly that they left no trace of their existence. The frustration of being erased so completely was maddening, but it was also educational in the cruelest way possible. The trust I'd placed in the permanence of human connections was revealed to be completely naive. The loyalty I'd shown was not just unrewarded. It was actively punished by being turned into evidence of my supposed inadequacy. The betrayal was complete in its efficiency, leaving no loose ends or uncomfortable reminders of what had been done. In the days and weeks that followed my departure, the silence from my former colleagues was deafening and revealing. No one called to check on me. No one sent a text asking how I was doing. No one seemed curious about what had really happened, or whether the official narrative matched reality. The professional relationships I'd invested in for years turned out to be as substantial as morning mist, dissipating the moment they were no longer convenient or socially acceptable to maintain. The disappointment wasn't just about being forgotten. It was about discovering that I'd apparently never been as important to these people as they'd been to me. The confidence I'd had in the mutual nature of workplace friendships was shattered by this complete radio silence. Rebecca had succeeded not just in destroying my reputation, but in making my very existence inconvenient for people who had once sought my help and advice. The learning was painful but necessary. In the modern workplace, most relationships are transactional, and when the transaction is no longer beneficial, the relationship simply ceases to exist. The trust I'd placed in human connection was revealed to be largely misplaced, at least in the context of professional environments where self-preservation often trumps loyalty or basic decency. The transformation of my desk into a storage area for office supplies was perhaps the most visceral symbol of how quickly someone can be erased from institutional memory. Within a week of my departure, the space where I'd spent countless hours, where I'd celebrated small victories and weathered difficult challenges, had become a dumping ground for excess inventory and forgotten files. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was existential, calling into question the very idea that individual contributions matter in the grand scheme of corporate life. The frustration of being replaced so quickly and thoroughly was educational in the harshest possible way. The professional environment I believed in, where hard work and dedication were supposed to mean something, revealed itself to be nothing more than an endless cycle of replaceable parts. The loyalty I'd shown was not just unreciprocated, it was actively detrimental to my own well-being and career advancement. The learning that emerged from this final phase of my experience was perhaps the most valuable and painful. The workplace is not a family. Colleagues are not friends. And the only person who will truly advocate for your interests is you. The confidence I'd once had in the fundamental fairness of professional life was gone forever, replaced by a hard-earned understanding of how quickly someone can go from valued team member to forgotten footnote. As I drove away from Henderson and Associates for the last time, I understood that Rebecca had accomplished something truly remarkable in her destruction of my professional life. She hadn't just gotten me fired. She'd made my firing seem justified, even necessary, to people who had worked with me for years. The betrayal was so complete and systematic that it left no room for doubt or second-guessing among the people who remained. The trust I'd placed in the basic fairness of workplace relationships was shattered beyond repair. But in its place came a different kind of confidence. The confidence that comes from understanding exactly how cruel and calculating people can be when their own interests are at stake. The disappointment of leaving that job was profound, but it was mixed with a strange sense of liberation at finally seeing the situation clearly. The learning that came from this experience would change how I approached every future professional relationship, every offer of help, every moment of vulnerability in a workplace setting. The loyalty I'd given so freely would never again be offered without careful consideration of the potential cost. And the confidence I'd once had in human decency was replaced by a more realistic understanding of how far some people will go to protect and advance their own interests, regardless of who gets destroyed in the process. Months have passed since that final day at Henderson and Associates, but talking about what Rebecca did to me still feels like pressing on a bruise that never quite healed. The betrayal cut so deep because it came from someone I trusted completely, someone I'd helped countless times without expecting anything in return, except basic human decency. The professional environment I'd believed in, where good work and loyalty were supposed to matter, was revealed to be nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Even now, sitting in my small apartment trying to make sense of what happened, I find myself second-guessing every memory, every interaction, wondering if I'd misread the signs or been naive about the true nature of workplace relationships. The confidence I once had in my ability to judge people's character is still shattered, leaving me wary of forming new professional friendships or trusting colleagues who seem genuinely kind. The disappointment isn't just about losing that job. It's about losing faith in the fundamental goodness of people I work with. The learning has been ongoing and painful, forcing me to rebuild my understanding of how to navigate professional relationships without becoming either cynical or vulnerable to future betrayals. For the longest time, I couldn't even talk about what happened without feeling ashamed, as if I was somehow responsible for being so thoroughly deceived and manipulated. The trust I'd placed in Rebecca felt like evidence of my own stupidity, rather than proof of my character or capacity for loyalty. Friends and family would ask what happened at my old job, and I'd find myself minimizing the betrayal, saying things like, "It just wasn't a good fit," or "There were some personality conflicts." The frustration of being unable to articulate the depth of what had been done to me was almost as painful as the original betrayal itself. How do you explain to someone that you were destroyed not by incompetence or misconduct, but by trusting the wrong person? The professional environment that had seemed so normal and functional was revealed to be a snake pit where kindness was weakness and loyalty was stupidity. The learning that came from trying to process this experience was brutal. Sometimes the victim of workplace betrayal becomes complicit in their own erasure by being too ashamed to tell the truth about what really happened. The disappointment wasn't just in Rebecca's actions, but in my own inability to defend myself, even in conversations with people who cared about me. The realization that I'd been convenient rather than valued hit me like a physical blow, reshaping my understanding of every interaction we'd ever had. All those times I'd stayed late to help her, covered for her mistakes, celebrated her successes as if they were my own. None of it had been building the friendship I thought we shared. The betrayal wasn't just about that one night when I offered to help. It was about years of being seen as useful rather than important, reliable rather than respected. The confidence I'd had in our professional partnership was based on my assumption that she valued my contributions the way I valued hers. The trust I'd invested in our relationship was apparently one-sided, with me giving loyalty and receiving only exploitation in return. The professional environment we'd shared was never really collaborative. I'd just been too naive to see that I was being used. The disappointment of understanding this retroactively was devastating, forcing me to question not just that relationship, but every professional friendship I thought I'd built over my career. The learning was harsh but necessary. Some people are skilled at making you feel valued, while actually seeing you as nothing more than a convenient resource to be discarded when it suits their purposes. What haunts me most is knowing that Rebecca's betrayal wasn't impulsive or accidental. It was calculated and deliberate, which means she'd probably been planning it long before I had any idea we were anything other than friends and colleagues. The frustration of being so completely blindsided by someone I trusted with my professional reputation is still overwhelming months later. She knew exactly what she was doing when she accepted my help that night, probably already planning how she'd use my willingness to assist as evidence of my supposed overreach. The loyalty I'd shown her was weaponized against me with surgical precision, turned into proof that I was inappropriate, intrusive, incompetent. The professional environment that had felt safe and collaborative was actually a battlefield where I'd been fighting without realizing I was under attack. The confidence I'd had in my own judgment was shattered by the realization that I'd been living in a completely different reality than the one Rebecca inhabited. The trust I'd placed in her character was so misplaced that it calls into question my ability to read people at all. The betrayal was so complete that it made me doubt not just her, but my own perceptions, my own memories, my own understanding of what had actually happened between us over the years. If I could go back to that Thursday evening when she was drowning in paperwork, I would make completely different choices based on what I now understand about the true cost of being too generous in a professional setting. The disappointment isn't just about what happened. It's about my own naivety in believing that kindness and loyalty would be reciprocated, or at least respected. I would have eaten my dinner, kept my doctor's appointment, gone home to my own life instead of sacrificing my personal time for someone who saw my help as an inconvenience rather than a gift. The learning has been brutal but valuable. In the modern workplace, your willingness to help can be turned into evidence of your inadequacy by someone skilled in office politics. The trust I placed in basic human decency was misplaced, at least when it comes to people who see colleagues as competitors rather than team members. The professional environment I believed in doesn't actually exist. It's just a comforting illusion that makes naive people like me vulnerable to exploitation. The confidence I once had in my own goodness has been tempered by the understanding that goodness without boundaries is just foolishness. The betrayal taught me that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to say no, to choose your own needs over someone else's convenience, to protect your own interests before trying to help others with theirs. The wound Rebecca inflicted on my professional life has healed somewhat, but it's left scars that change how I approach every new workplace relationship and every offer to help a colleague in need. The frustration of having been so thoroughly played still surfaces when I remember how easily she destroyed years of trust and friendship for her own benefit. The confidence I once had in the basic fairness of professional life is gone, replaced by a more cautious approach to forming workplace relationships. The learning that came from this experience has been valuable but costly, teaching me to protect myself in ways I never thought I'd need to. The trust I give now is carefully measured and constantly evaluated, which feels both necessary and sad. The disappointment isn't just about what Rebecca did to me. It's about what her betrayal took from me in terms of my ability to be open and generous with new colleagues. The professional environment I now inhabit is viewed through the lens of this experience, making me more strategic and less authentic in my interactions with coworkers. The loyalty I offer is now conditional and limited, which protects me, but also diminishes the kinds of relationships I can build. The betrayal taught me survival skills I never wanted to need, but it also cost me a kind of professional innocence that I'll never get back, leaving me wiser but lonelier in every workplace I'll ever enter. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar, or if you want to learn more about protecting yourself in toxic workplace environments, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I'll be sharing more stories and strategies about surviving workplace betrayal, recognizing manipulation before it,